Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's Vin PF, and on today's episode we've got something a little bit different. I say that a lot on the channel, but that's because I seem to be able to have this ability to get hold of really interesting things and things that are kind of like not typical, let's say, but I like to cover things that are weird and wonderful. So when something like this drops in my inbox, hi Vin, do you want to try a bottle of this whiskey? Hell yes is the answer, send that over. Now here we have the Never Say Die Barrel Strength. They've got a standard release. I've actually got a wee sample here. I haven't tried this one yet, but this is the standard small batch bourbon. And it's got a bit of a weird story, and it's going to be mostly available to UK guys. So I know bourbon, obviously that's going to switch on a lot of people from the US, but this is something that you're not going to be able to get hold of just yet, which is really rare to say about a bourbon. So what we've got here is a Kentucky straight bourbon, distilled in Kentucky, obviously. It was aged over there for about 5 years, and then it was shipped across in its barrels over to the UK. Now that again is weird in itself. Usually, obviously, what you would do is bottle it in the States, and then you would ship it across in its bottles. That obviously is probably a little bit more expensive to do, or you've got to import it and whatnot. When you're buying it in bulk in the containers, it's probably a little bit easier to do that. However, obviously there's a lot of risk with shipping wooden barrels. That we don't. There's a reason why we don't put them on like vibrating tables and stuff like that. They're robust, but they're potentially fragile. So when you're shipping bourbons across the world, to like a good example is Aldi's Clark's, that would be shipped in huge containers, IBCs, or maybe even in a vehicle like a big a tanker kind of thing, and that would be dealt with over in Germany. I think it's dealt with where it's bottled over there. Now here's the key thing: you can call it a bourbon because it only has to be made in Kentucky. It doesn't actually have to be exclusively aged and bottled in Kentucky or in America like you do with Scotch. Now Scotch, you can't call it a Scotch if it hasn't been distilled, aged and bottled in Scotland. So a good example of that is if you buy a bottle of Scotch that it has been distilled, aged and bottled in Scotland, and then you decant that bottle out in England or anywhere other than Scotland, if you decant that out into a sample bottle and then you write on that sample bottle single malt Scotch, technically that's in breach of the SWA regulations. Obviously they're not going to be coming for you, they're not going to know about that, but if you were trying to sell that, if you then if you bought a cask of Scottish whisky and brought it over the border to England and then bottled it in England and tried to call it a Scotch, the SWA would be right up your leg. But that's not the case with bourbon. Something weird. There's a lot of rules with bourbon, way more than Scotch in my opinion. But one of them is not that it has to be bottled in America. There you go. So that's what's happened. It's 5 years over there. It's been shipped over in its casks. It's then been finally aged in that same cask. So there's no fancy finishes going on here. It's then been aged in England. I was going to say UK, but it's in England, and that's at the White Peaks Distillery, which is an up-and-coming distillery for sure, and they're making huge waves with some really incredible whiskey. Really must get some for the channel because every time I try them, it's always fantastic. So, yeah, they're doing that there. They got 100 barrels in their first run. I think they're probably going to do a little bit more of this in the future. But the cool thing about it is, there's many cool things. They're releasing bits and bobs here and there, but when they find an incredible cask, I guess they're trying them periodically. We don't know the final finishing age time or how much effect that has. Obviously a different climate. Probably ages a little bit slower, to be fair, because Kentucky's got a stark difference between day and night and summer and winter, whereas the UK is, although it gets cold and warm here, it's a little bit more stable day on, day out. The kind of cool thing about this is that not only do they get to pick random barrels at random times and sell them like they have here, single cask versions. There's quite a lot of versions of this now. I think this is like the 7th release they've done of this. But also the really cool thing is that they've now got a fresh, really fresh ex-bourbon cask to age their own liquid in at White Peaks. Now, if you're going to be buying ex-bourbon casks worldwide, what you'll be doing is buying them from a kind of exporter in the US. The US guys will age their liquid, they'll bottle it, they'll tip it out and they'll bottle it, and then they'll sell that cask to an exporter or do it themselves, whatever. But my point is that by the time that we get that cask over here in the UK, it's going to have been sat with probably a little bit left in it, but only, you know, a small amount sloshing around. The rest of it's going to have started to dry out and all that. These casks are full or near as damn it, you know, the age will share taking their bit. They're as full as they're ever going to be. So to get that kind of freshness is kind of unparalleled, and they're saying that they think it makes a big impact on their whiskey. We haven't seen any of it yet, but it's going to be coming through in the next few years when they think it's ready. Doubly cool is that down in England, where I am, we don't have the same rules as the SWA. SWA says you have to pretty much tip all of that out, and it'd be as minimal as possible. We don't have to do that though. So I imagine if they're reasonably clever about what they're doing, they've probably left in a good little wedge in the bottom of that cask to kind of influence their own whiskey even more than it would do if it was just the barrel. Very, very long intro, but I think it deserves it because they're calling it England's bourbon, which I'm not sure about that yet. I'm not sure how much impact just being in England is going to have on this, but I like it nonetheless because I can get hold of it. Is the important factor. You know, they've got 7 releases now. All of them, I think, are still pretty much in stock on Master of Malt. Links in the description below, as always. But usually when a good old single cask bourbon is makes its way over here, it's obviously allocation. You know, a lot of it's going to stay in America, and they're going to ship over a good wedge of it over to here, but then it's allocation, even if it's a big brand. So to have one that's kind of exclusively ours, hasn't made its way elsewhere yet, is only good for me. I like that. Right, I think that's enough of an intro. Let's get into the actual whiskey and see what we've got. We've got a nice, you know, it's a bourbon, so we know it's going to be natural colour and all that jazz. So we've got a nice, you know, dark, coppery, borderline on light treacle kind of vibe with it. Let's get into the nose and see what we got. Now on the nose, I'm getting some element of that ABV, but it isn't so high. Like this isn't going to be one of those ones that it frazzles your nose hairs immediately. This one's 60.6%. They're different levels of ABV, so you'll have to watch that. I probably should have said earlier as well, this one's barrel number 260, bottle number 115. So, yeah, release number 7 as it's called on Master of Malt, but that's the one I've got today. And these are all single casks, so I think single cask, yeah, they must be single casks. So, what I have here might not be exactly the same as what you've got if you've got a different version. Every single cask is slightly different. So let's get onto the nose. For me, it's heaps of caramel and toffee, a little bit of kind of coffee on the back end. It's not even like, it's not a kind of even a fresh coffee. It's almost like how coffee smells when it's gone cold. Brown sugar, and a little bit of orange zest on the back end, which is interesting. This is a 75% corn, 21% rye, and a little bit of malted barley, 4% to round it off. So yeah, it's very corn-led, although the rye notes are letting themselves known on this. Let's try on the palate. You get a couple of milliseconds to savour that. It's more orangey and more fresh ginger, but then the big ABV hit happens. It tastes every bit of that 60%. It's huge. It's a monster. I'm quite well versed at cask strength whiskey now, so it doesn't bother me too much. But I can imagine this being quite hot for some people. There's some tobacco elements on it. Little bit of spearmint on the back end, which I sometimes get on rye, which is fine. I'm enjoying that. And then it's a huge peppery back end. Let's have another little sip. Finishes a little odd. It's quite herbal in nature, almost like medicinal herbal. A little bit of that mint from the spearmint is kicking through, which I'm liking, and very tannic. You know, it's extreme leathers, oaks, and tobaccos coming all the way through this. But it's a very good bourbon. I love a good bourbon. I especially love cask strength bourbon. So to get this, I think this runs for about 80 quid in the UK, maybe a bit less if you're looking around. But I think that's pretty good value. We struggle to get good single cask bourbons over here readily available. Obviously it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but to get it online on Master of Malt whenever you want is quite hard to do. And it's in that ballpark. It's in that ballpark of that 80 quid. Obviously this has gone through a couple of extra processes, so it's probably going to run a little bit more expensive than you would be typically seeing from one of the big boys. But to support local businesses and new innovation and things like that, I'm all for it. So for me, it's definitely a winner. I'm going to massively enjoy this. And at some point what I'll probably do is on Instagram do a little comment about this one when I actually cover it, the 46% version of it, 47.5 sorry. I'll do a little bit of a tete-a-tete about that. They also sent me some of the unocean aged, only just a wee little snifter. So this is before it's been on the ocean and been in the UK. I tried that and it is lovely. It is actually a little bit different to this, but like I said earlier, I couldn't tell you if it was the English climate that was doing that or if it was the time on sea being like absolutely messed around within that boat. Probably that, to be fair, but you know, that's why I didn't bring it to the channel, because I wasn't sure what part of it was doing it, but interesting to try it nonetheless. Finally, then they did also send me an old fashioned as well. I don't really do cocktails, but maybe I'll do that as an Instagram post as well later. But yeah, let me know if you've tried these guys. Very interesting bourbons, definitely worth checking out if you're into bourbon, because for me, I am, and I'm enjoying it, so maybe you will too. In that case, I'll say cheers to you, and I'll see you again on more videos.